I think we'll wait 1 minute if that's okay with everyone. I still see some people signing in, and then we'll get started. All right, Vanessa, you good to go? Okay, we'd like to welcome everyone to the potentially first technology committee meeting ever. We now have with my fellow co-chair, Vanessa Aronson, we're hoping to meet more regularly and talk about more issues. That being said, it's very fitting that we have our own Assembly member, Dan Court, to speak with us for our first meeting. And this is, he's going to be speaking about a bill to kind of ban reverse search warrants. And he'll, I'm sure, explain a little bit what that means and why, as a representative of our community, it actually was extremely important that legislation and action be taken. I believe we've, in various other committee meetings, such as when we were talking about contact tracing confidentiality, we briefly discussed this bill during those sessions as well. Vanessa, anything to add, or can we hand it over to our Assembly member?
Yeah, we're just so excited to have you here, Assemblymember Court. So thank you so much for joining our inaugural technology meeting for this term, I guess. And thank you for introducing this bill. We'd love to hear a little bit more about it. And then I know folks have some questions.
Sure. Well, Rebecca and Vanessa, thank you so much for inviting me and for being the co-chairs of this committee. And Vanessa, it's good to see you. And if I look forward to seeing small ones running around behind you. I
am rehearsing for a Purim spiel right now, so it wouldn't be my small one that will run behind me. It might be someone, maybe other small ones might run behind me.
I'm in the same boat, but it's good to be here. And to the committee members, thank you for serving on the board. I served for 8 years myself, many moons ago. So. Let me talk briefly about this bill that I've sponsored for several years, what the impetus was, and why I think it's important with respect to technology, and then turn it over to Vanessa, Rebecca, and the committee members to ask whatever questions you'd like. We'll start from where I end up on this bill. The Fourth Amendment of the federal Constitution and the state Constitution requires that a search be done that's particularized, and that is really the essence of the Fourth Amendment. That I'll spare everyone the history of the Revolutionary War and why that led to articles of our Constitution, but British soldiers were allowed to have general searches and find what they might. Ultimately, our Constitution, the federal government, had a Fourth Amendment, which required, understandably, a search warrant that particularized what one was searching for. And that's self-evident in our constitutional framework. The reverse search warrant works against that basic principle. It has not been found yet to be unconstitutional, but that doesn't stop different state legislatures, the laboratories, if you will, the 50 laboratories across the country, from weighing in on this matter to push the federal government to find this practice unconstitutional as against the Fourth Amendment. What is this practice? We don't have to stray to a hypothetical because it happened in the Community Board 8 area, which is why I drafted legislation to preclude its use. One night, about 4 years ago, the white supremacist group, the Proud Boys, for reasons not worth going into here because we don't deal with politics on the community board level, but were invited to a club, a political club's operation to give a speech or some sort of presentation. In support of that presentation, the Proud Boys, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which considers them a white supremacist group, were active in and around the street on Lexington Avenue. The 19th precinct was aware of them. They had close to 40 officers on the street. But in the mayhem of the violence that erupted thereafter, very few arrests were made of the Proud Boys. In response to, we'll call it a failure to rightly address street violence here in the Community Board 8 area, the district attorney's office, at that time under Cy Vance, went through their normal processes of trying to investigate this matter. Cameras in and around the area, taking witness statements, trying to find any eyewitness that could attest to the violent acts to lead to arrest. That was not successful, as far as I know. So then Mr. Vance's office, the DA's office at that time, served what was known as a reverse search warrant or a geofence warrant. And basically that is a warrant on phone carriers, AT&T, T-Mobile, anyone else, based upon the longitude and longitude lines in and around that neighborhood into certain hours, essentially trying to get cell phone data, text message data, DM, direct message data, or any other communications that anyone, not a particularized person, but anyone was using in and around that area. If you were taking a bus home up 3rd Avenue at that time, and you were on your phone, your data would have been taken. If you were taking a cab, yellow taxi or Uber down Park Avenue or Lexington Avenue at that time of the search warrant, your data would have been taken from you. The fact that you were unaware of that fact does not take what I believe to be an unconstitutional approach and make it constitutional. There was a harm here. If Vanessa was in a cab up Park Avenue at that time coming home and her data was taken pursuant to a search warrant, there was an infringement of her constitutional rights, irrespective of the fact that she was unaware of that matter. As it is, Mr. Vance, we don't know what he did with the data at that time, but ultimately no arrests were made. So the idea that this data was so crucial to the investigation, it led to actually no additional arrests. I learned of this practice and found it, to me, offensive and in violation of the Fourth Amendment, even though no federal court has exactly said those words as of yet. I want to be fair that this has not been ruled unconstitutional. But if you just look at the plain language of the Fourth Amendment and all the case law, it requires a particularized search, whether by search warrant or by observation of the police officer. And this goes against that because this is a general securing of information in the hopes that the review of the general information will allow law enforcement to glean some criminal conduct. That is the opposite of how investigations and our constitutional principles work. So along with myself and Senator Zellner Myrie from Brooklyn, we authored legislation outlawing this practice. And I think most significantly, or as significantly, saying that it could not be used in a state court for prosecution purposes. Now that doesn't stop the federal government from using it because of course that's not within the state's power to prevent. But I think it sends a strong message on civil liberties and privacy and constitutional rights that the state ought to send and be a leader amongst the 50 states on privacy rights and constitutional principles, rather than a follower and allow other states to go forward with this and set the tone maybe for federal legislation, which reins in to some extent Department of Justice practices that allow this type of reverse search warrant. So that's the bill. We're doing our best to try and move this legislation. It would be first in the nation. Virginia, I think, has other states are now drafting legislation to this effect, but this would be first in the nation legislation. And I think this is just an unconstitutional practice. Also, if you can imagine during the protest during Black Lives Matter and other, think about the way this could be used to go after protests. Almost the double calamity of an abridgment of Fourth Amendment and First Amendment rights. I'm not suggesting that the NYPD or DA's offices have done that. The fact is we just don't know. But imagine how easy it is to try and go after protesters by just basing a search warrant on a specific place at a specific time. You could get thousands of cell phone information and data. And this is a truly, I wouldn't use the word scary proposition, but it's wrong. And it's abridgment of your constitutional rights as far as I see it. And it's a practice that New York State should stop. And speaking of stop, I will stop here and turn it back over to the co-chairs. And thank you for a couple minutes of your time tonight.
I think just before we turn it over to questions, I know you worked closely with Albert Foxconn, who's spoken at some of our meetings before about this. And again, that came up in the context of, the Contact Tracing Confidentiality Act. And you mentioned we have no idea what happened to data, very, very likely, a lot of which is from members of our own community. Have you thought about, if this is unsuccessful, kind of trying to legislate to control what happens to that information, whether or not it gets purged? Is there any action we can take to kind of find out where all of this, sensitive personal information is currently kind of being stored for no use?
There's a method. Unfortunately, I think the direct way is not legislatively, it's through FOIL. Alvin Bragg's predecessor, Cy Vance, spent $10 million creating a cybersecurity lab within the district attorney's office. I presume that data was stored there, although I don't know. I think Alvin, Mr. Bragg, would be much more responsive to FOIL requests to at least identify where that data is, whose data was taken that night. Is this a practice that's going on? So I would, that's the only means I know legally to try and push to get this information. I don't think you would ever get the information in a non-redacted form for good reasons, but I think it would do a public service and certainly help with the legislation if 1,000 New Yorkers knew that their data was taken from them that night. Who 99% of them, if not 100, have no idea that this happened to them, that they were subject to surveillance that evening. So I think FOIL is the way to go. I don't know what the response by the current district attorney will be. We were not able to secure any of this data from the former district attorney, but that's where the data is stored or hopefully destroyed for the peace of mind of those individuals whose data was taken, even though they don't know it.
Thanks. Vanessa, do you want to add anything before we open to questions?
I guess I'll just have my own question is, on the one hand, we want to keep our community safe. And so I want to be thoughtful about those interests. So I'm curious if there's data on how accurate these reverse search warrants are.
Yes, I'll reference more Albert Foxconn, who knows the answer to that question in greater detail, but it's not that there's a margin for error. There was a Kentucky case where they just got the wrong person, and can you imagine being subject to an FBI dragnet based upon that information, or state? And also, so the information just by description is not going to be, it has a lower degree of accuracy because it is a fishing expedition. They're going to glean things from broad text messages or emails or conversations, which would not be the basis naturally of a search warrant. Information that if you presented it in court would not lead a reasonable judge, he or she, to issue a search warrant, but yet they get this treasure trove of information, which I don't believe they're constitutionally permitted to, and they can draw their own conclusions and investigate based upon their own conclusions. It's almost in reverse. It is in reverse of the way things should work. So I think the nature of the search and the nature of the information secured leads to a higher degree of inaccuracy. But Albert can give you the specifics on the number of cases that have gone awry. I know of one in Kentucky that just got it completely wrong.
Can sorry, Sherry, I know you've had your hand up very patiently, but actually to follow up then, are you suggesting if there's a reverse search warrant and my data were a part of that, is it possible for them to use something else they found about another crime? Like,
yes.
Yes. Okay.
That's yes. If you had information, not you, but let's say Jane Doe had a search warrant and she was involved in a conspiracy or shoplifted earlier that day, that would be information law enforcement would have, and it would be solely within their discretion what they would do with that. But that is the nature. I mean, and that is directly antithetical to the principles of the Fourth Amendment, which require a particularized search. But that's what I'm describing is the complete opposite. So they're not limited in any way. They're only limited by the DA saying, I would never do that, or I wouldn't use that, or we were only looking for search words X, Y, and Z. But who's to say that's true? And who's to say they would actually limit themselves? So they could use your data for any purpose to go down any avenue or road they want, and you would never know about it unless something came of their use of it.
Well.
So I'm sure Vanessa and I might have some more questions later, but let's turn it to other board members or members of the public. Let's unmute Sherry.
Thanks, Assemblyman. I'm so sorry that you decided to retire. You've been a good Assemblyman. I'm an attorney, so I'm trying to think through the whole process. Typically, if there's an issue which is either considered constitutional or not, there's a court case, and then legislation is passed in order to implement the court's decision. So my basic question is, has this been adjudicated in any way, and how have the decisions come out?
It's been adjudicated by certain federal courts, and some courts have been close to, no court has said it's unconstitutional, but some federal courts have really questioned this practice, almost begging the higher courts to take a look at this, the circuit courts and or the Supreme Court, although for other reasons I would have some concern about this current Supreme Court weighing in on these matters based upon some justices' views of executive privilege, but that's a side point.
None of the civil ACLU or any of the other civil rights kind of groups have not picked up on this?
Not yet. The problem is standing. If Jane Doe doesn't know her data was taken,
right, then
who is the individual that has the jurisdiction to bring the suit? The ACLU can't bring the suit they have to bring it on behalf of an individual.
Somebody, obviously.
Or
right.
I would have to draw up the petition on the behalf of an individual. If the Manhattan DA's office in the past has been unresponsive to FOIL requests or redacts the person's name for legitimate reasons, there's no individual to give standing to actually get in front of a courtroom. So the practice of the search warrant in and of itself has stymied a legal challenge. Less so on the federal level because of the different interpretations in federal court. I'm a state practitioner, so I can't speak to that. But the nature, the such secretive nature of the data collection where the individual doesn't even know he or she has had their data taken, makes it almost impossible to bring suit to get into state court because you don't have an individual standing because he or she doesn't know that their data was taken.
And you have no way to identify who might have been on the bus at that location because you don't know. They won't release the name that you could. Okay.
Yeah, they're not. The Manhattan DA's office in the past has been unresponsive to FOIL. You can't expect every Manhattanite to come barking down the DA's office to try and say, was it I? Was it I? So the secretive nature of the search warrant has made it difficult to secure standing. And
Okay.
that's why there's been no state court challenge that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Alita?
Thank you. Hi, Assembly Member. Nice to see you.
This is
I joined a few minutes late, so if you already explained this, I apologize. And I also thought that I heard that if they found other information on a phone that could be used, why wouldn't the ordinary rules of what constitutes a lawful search and seizure apply? If the search goes beyond the parameters of a search warrant, for instance, my understanding is that anything gotten from that is the fruit of the poisonous tree and can't be used. What would that not apply to these?
It would apply if somebody asked for an evident, if the person, since many of us are lawyers here, we'll take it down the chain of events. Let's say someone gets arrested under my example for shoplifting because of information gleaned from a reverse search warrant. That the information led to the law enforcement, the 19th precinct, going back to a clothing store to secure a video camera that showed the individual. How would that individual know that the information that led the precinct to get the video cameras was actually gleaned from a reverse search warrant where that person had text messages with her friend about what she was going to do with the stolen goods that she took from the clothing store? So that it would only be the most succinct type of evidentiary hearing where you're relying on expertise of criminal defense lawyer, really getting to the bottom of why the police officers knew to look at video camera under my hypothetical. I'm just saying there's no guarantees that the fruit of the poisonous tree would be identified because of the secretive nature of the data collection under the reverse search warrant. It could, Alita, but there's no guarantee.
So if it were, I mean, that's kind of an easier example because the police would, with an instance of, I guess, enough money looted or enough objects looted from the store, go to this house for videotape anyway. But let's say it was a cache of guns that they were moving from the south up through the city, and they found that from some text messages with a drop off and a pickup time and cash on arrival kind of thing. Then that's maybe an easier. And I'm not defending this at all, but that may be an easier instance where it's directly linkable to the information gleaned from that search warrant. And I don't even know why I'm arguing with you. By nature, I'm sorry.
You were right, but it gives the law enforcement, I would suspect, would then try and get other search warrants to surveil those individuals, or try and find independent evidence separate and distinct from what they found on the reverse search warrant under the rules of inevitable discovery or something of that nature. It's just giving them a pathway that they ought not to get. Now, the scourge of guns across our city need not be discussed here. It's so self-evident and a tragedy of epic proportions. But we cannot give up our basic Fourth Amendment rights in the hopes that will make us safe. It won't. And you are not suggesting that, Alita. So I know that, and I know you. It could be suppressed under the fruit of the poisonous tree ultimately, but equally plausible is that it's not. And the initial source of the information is never known by the judge.
That's a problem, is that the judges who are, at least theoretically, the gatekeepers of what's correct and reasonable to do, are not able to do that because they lack the information. You know, so you mentioned other states. Is there any state close to something like this, or any state that has variations that are more limiting?
I think we're first. I think there are other state legislatures. I think Virginia that are trying to move legislation similar to mine, but not specifically yet. I think this is one of these issues where one of these few issues that are nonpartisan, really, where there could be a meeting of minds. I also just wanted to bring up one point to the point about the evidence. Understand there could also be forum shopping here. That state district attorneys could hand over the information gleaned to the U.S. attorneys who have no limitations at all. So there's the ability for much mischief here to try and get information gleaned from these reverse search warrants into a federal court, if not a state court, or vice versa. So there's the ability to do much mischief to get admissible evidence and try and make arrests here with this. But no states have passed anything that I'm trying to, nor has New York State either yet.
And I have just one more question, since you brought up forum shopping. Could they go, if those guns were moving through, let's say, New Jersey, could they go to New Jersey if there were such an issue or a prohibition in New York? Could they also forum shop with other states?
No doubt. And essentially, I would if there was by state travel, then there's jurisdiction. So the answer is yes. I'm not a subject matter jurisdiction expert, but I think that would be the case.
Well, it makes sense if Texas is letting people sue abortion providers in other states. And don't get me started on that, so I will stop here. Thank you so much. And thank you, Rebecca and Vanessa.
I see we have a member of the public with a hand raised before we call him Barbara. Can we unmute Boaz? I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
You pronounce it better than my mother. Thank you very much, Dan. First of all, I follow you. I think that you are doing a very important job, specifically around helping people that, got busted, but they haven't done really anything, and they're trying to fight the system. Regarding specifically this bill, on overall, I understand from where you are coming. I don't think this is the right time to limit the law enforcement here in New York, limit their tools. Maybe maybe the reverse lookup is not the best tool out there. Maybe it's a big brother. I've rise and born in Tel Aviv, and Israel is using those big brother solutions to protect the citizens, and I see what's going on right now in New York City, and the situation is not good. The public safety is not good, and I think that at least for the coming year, until there will be reduction, in the crime, we shouldn't tie the ends of the law enforcement. I think that there should be more monitoring on how they're using those tools, but I think that eventually what you're saying, they cannot use the reverse lookup. Again, thank you very much for your time, for coming here and taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Boaz. I have family in Ramat Gan, so I'm trying to identify what building you're in front of, but I respect your point of view.
Let's unmute Barbara.
Thanks, Dan. I have two apologies. First of all, unlike my esteemed colleagues, I am not an attorney. My legal knowledge comes from Law and Order. And second of all, I came a couple of minutes late. So please, let me ask some basic things. Why is this so different than our infringement of privacy that's around that we accept? I once had some tax things to do, and I wanted to go back and figure out when I was going to a certain place. Do you know the MTA, if you use your Metro card, like I have a senior card, so they know it's me, I knew every single station for every single time I went. Couldn't that be used? And then more scary a little bit for me, I did some volunteer work and I had to take fingerprinting. Would that stay on? Is that something that can be used future? And what about all the DNA testing that people are doing just to find out about their ancestors? How much can that be used? As well as medical DNA. I had medical DNA testing and as well as medical DNA testing.
Well, there's two examples here. One, when the individual wants information on him or herself, obviously that should be provided. But the examples you give, for the most part, are particularized to the individual. So if someone wants the information, if there was a subpoena served on the MTA for Barbara Rudder's whereabouts on day 10 from this month, only so long as they had it. My apologies. It's only been Zoom for 2 years and I still can't figure it out. If there was a particularized search warrant based upon your alleged activities on March 10th of this month, then trying to get your records from the MTA where you were that day is obviously permissible and accepted because they have a good faith belief and they got a search warrant. But that's a long stretch from just trying to secure all your information.
Okay, let me give another suggestion, if I may interrupt. Somebody was stabbed on the subway, and they're trying to say who was on the subway car that day, who was on the subway that day on that station. That's not individual. They could find out that I was there for no reason at all, except the
NYPD has been solving crimes for 150 years through basic investigatory techniques, and that has expanded tenfold with the use of cameras in and around almost every platform, as well as personal cell phones. There is really no reason why the usual techniques of solving crimes are insufficient, that they need to do these data sweeps.
Okay.
And learn what? In most cases, or at least in the one case that we know about, the data was completely useless to lead to further arrests. So not only was there infringement of constitutional rights, as I see it, it didn't work. It didn't help.
Okay.
That's at least my view. Yeah.
I understand. Sort of. I have to watch Law and Order to figure it out more.
You won't see this on Law and Order.
I always get a laugh from attorneys when I say my knowledge is from Law and Order. So.
Well, my good friend Barry Schneider, I see him.
Yes, good afternoon. Good evening, Dan. How you doing?
I'm well. How are you, Barry?
And happy Purim. I wish I could share some Humantaschen with you, but that's for another time. I agree 100% with the theory behind your law and the word language behind your law. Let's say the community board passes a resolution unanimously to support. How do we get this to be law? What do we need to do next?
It's a very difficult, that's a great question. One, a resolution would be very helpful because it's just to have, for the local assembly member to have the community board in support is something that's basic and fundamental to help in passing legislation. But secondly, this is a difficult this has been more difficult because than I had anticipated initially, probably because of the general feelings and parameters that Boaz accurately described, that although we won't, this is probably not something that the 19th precinct or the 17th precinct ever employ, and not a technique they even think about. The general feelings of, and I understand this, of the increase in certain criminal conduct in 3 of the 5 violent felony has made categories, has generally led to making it difficult for legislation of this nature in Albany. While one has nothing to do with the other, this legislation is posing more difficult to pass than I think it should, because most people I talk to about this understand that this is not consistent with the Fourth Amendment, that this practice just can't be squared away with the Fourth Amendment, even though no federal court has said those exact words yet.
I'm concerned, I'm sure, as many people are, about the status of democracy in America today. And I think we've got to get beyond the hesitation to do the right thing, which in my mind is going forward with this type of legislation. We have to sweep away those people who say, well, gee, this is okay to do because the results will be terrific. Nonsense. Let's stick by the rule of law that has brought us to this point from 1776. Going forward, let's say community will support this. What's the next step that a citizen like me and all the other board members who have a similar attitude toward democracy can do next? What can we do next?
Right to the governor.
Okay.
I think people voicing serious privacy concerns, and that's what this is. The chief executive of the state should be concerned about this issue. There's 100 issues for the governor to be concerned about, but I think writing to the governor is helpful.
We will do that, and I'll urge all my friends and colleagues to do the same. Thank you very much, Dan. Stay well and be well. Thank you, sir.
I think we can also do what you suggested earlier, which is maybe as a committee go about filing a FOIL request and trying to see what, what's going on with what happened last time.
It's an excellent idea, Rebecca, in coordinating with Albert Kahn, that to try and identify that person or people who have standing to challenge this in state court.
Okay.
Yep. And there's a huge chance that they're, residents of our area. So with that, Sharon has another question. Sharon Pope Marshall.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you, Rebecca, and also Vanessa for your willingness to engage in this conversation. And also, I want to thank the Assembly member for turning the idea of retirement when you're supposed to slow down and ease into retirement. I feel like you're ramping it up and you have not slowed down one bit. Having said that, I'd like to follow up Barry's remarks and thank Barry for his remarks. And I want to recommend and suggest a resolution, but for the first time on the board, I have no idea how to phrase this. And I'm wondering if someone could help in phrasing a resolution in support of this idea of Dan's legislation.
We have a former community board chair on this call, so I think he didn't offer, but I'm sure Barry and Rebecca and Vanessa can work on that.
Rather than having me create the resolution, which we know what the words will be, let the co-chairs do that, please.
I think you can just, make a motion to write a resolution in support of this legislation and calling on the legislator to pass it ASAP and that the governor to sign it to law, and we could add in the specifics afterward. I will just ask before someone calls to question, and Sharon makes that motion, I might have a few questions as well. So back to Sharon.
Wow, I am so glad I thought of that resolution. And thank you very much for repeating, Rebecca, what I just said. Anyway, so I am putting forth that resolution. Don't ask me to repeat it again. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dan, for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Sharon.
Is there a second? Oh, Peggy, Price, second. Thank you. And I just wanted to ask two brief questions. The first is, I think, or we're hopeful that at some point, and we will address this at a future meeting, New York State might pass one of the many different data privacy bills regarding private companies that we have kind of stuck in the system. But I think, do you see any relationship between what seems to me a kind of like unwillingness even after COVID? I mean, getting the Contact Tracing Confidentiality Act passed seemed a little bit, I didn't understand how it got held up for so long when it was so timely. And I think after COVID, we've all experienced, how in a much more acute way, how much of our information is online. I mean, we've been conducting business virtually for 2 years itself. So do you see any relation to kind of the hesitancy, or do you think that the hesitancy with this bill is more focused on the public safety discussion, or do you think that the general kind of lack of concern for our privacy, state of privacy for New Yorkers is involved as well?
The latter, your last point. Of course, technology and the way we live on our phones and our computers in the history of the world is a newfound phenomena. What hasn't kept up with that phenomena is the right to privacy, the right to be secure on your data, the right to not have your data that was shared accidentally, privately with non-private entity or government entity, county, local, so many layers of different government with anyone else. And this bill does have a law enforcement component, but even if it didn't, it would still fall under the problem that we don't do enough in this state to protect people's privacies. Because until you are a victim of it, it's hard to get people's attentions focused on it. But if you talk to the victims of people who've had their information stolen or their likeness stolen or anything of that, they have gone through a miserable existence trying to claw that back. And most of us know somebody who's had that, but it trails the privacy rights that ought to be imputed in our laws trail technology. And that's just a fact, unfortunately, of state law.
Mm.
Vanessa, did you want to ask anything as well, or?
No, I'm good. Happy to go and vote on that motion if we need to, but just wanted to make sure you got your questions, Rebecca.
Thank you. I think I'll reserve. Does anyone have a motion to call to?
I think Sharon did, right?
We need to call. To
yes, that's me, Vanessa.
Okay.
Yes.
And I see Alita seconded. If you'd like to vote no, abstain, or not vote for cause, can you raise your hand? Seeing none, the resolution passes unanimously. I will read out the names of board members who are present for the record. Rebecca, Alita, are you trying to change your vote or to vote?
No, I'm not. I just had a question before Dan left on something different.
So Rebecca, Dangora, Vanessa Aronson, Alita Camp, Barbara Rutter, Barry Schneider, Elizabeth Ashby, Gail Behrens, Lori Boras, Peggy Price, Rami Siegel, Sherry Weiner, Sharon Pope Marshall, Taina Barrero. And that is everyone. Okay, we can unmute Alita now.
Thank you, and sorry about the interruption. Assembly member, since you brought up privacy or Rebecca or Vanessa did in a broad sense, and the internet, I'm just wondering, I can't think of the word for it, but if someone sends a nude picture or someone else posts someone's face on a nude body or some kind of other compromising, inappropriate, whatever words you want to use, pornographic post. Is there legislation in New York, and maybe I'm opening just a can of worms if this is the technology committee, about getting rid of those? Because that what you said about the nightmare of trying to get stuff off the internet reminded me of the awful stories that I've read about people trying to remove those kinds of images that are really disturbing and haunting and extremely detrimental to someone's mental health.
I think 3 or 4 years ago, the legislature passed and the prior governor signed a revenge porn bill that makes the practice was always illegal, but it created a civil right of action. The real problem here is we have it pretty good in CB8 because we have the 19th and the 17th, two of the best precincts in the city, is really getting the local precincts to take these crimes seriously, and they are crimes. But we did pass legislation. I don't think there has to be a change in penal law because it was always illegal to do that. But forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think 4 years ago we tightened up some of the language in the penal law as well. So the legislature did address this, I think, 4 years ago because of what you described. It's been an onslaught of what can generally be described as revenge pornography or revenge conduct or tactics that destroy people's lives.
And is there a civil action that goes with that? And is there anything, I know for defamation and this has come up a lot, I just don't know what the solution is with Google and Facebook, but the idea of publishing each publication of a defamatory statement is a wrong in itself, but nothing like that applies to this behemoth technology companies, I guess. And I don't mean to take you off on this track. I know there's an agenda.
Each individual aspect of it is a new wrong and a new action. That is correct.
Thank you.
And before we move on, I apologize. I know Ema's been here at the whole meeting, but her name wasn't renamed. So I just want to confirm that she was voting in favor of the resolution.
I wasn't here for the vote.
Thanks. Well, with that, thank you so much, Assembly Member, and hopefully we will get this resolution approved by the full board at the next meeting and take other action as we described. And thank you for all of your service to our community, both in the Assembly and on the community board previously.
Well, thank you, Rebecca and Vanessa, for hosting tonight, inviting me. It was a lively and interesting discussion, and that's what's great about committee meetings on the board. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I know I learned a lot from that discussion, so thank you for everyone for your questions, and thank you so much for your information. Really appreciate it.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. So we still have another item on the agenda. As was mentioned on the full board meeting, at the end of the full board meeting last Wednesday under new business, unless something changes between now and tomorrow, the New York state of emergency is set to expire tomorrow, which is the state of emergency is what currently suspends the open meetings law, and which is what allows us to hold our meetings virtually. So Russell talked a little bit about at least how our board will be proceeding this month, but we have on our meeting today, Tricia Shimamura, unfortunately not as a member of our board, but representing the borough president's office in her new role as community liaison. And we asked her to come and speak a little bit about just logistically, what does this mean if in fact the state of emergency is not extended tomorrow, and maybe others know more than I do, but I haven't seen anything in the news that makes it look like it will be extended. what does that mean for us now? Before I totally hand it over to Trisha, I do want to mention that we want to make sure this conversation today just talks about the very immediate implications and sort of the facts around this. We know that there are a few pieces of legislation floating around about potentially allowing for virtual or hybrid meetings in perpetuity, regardless of the open meetings law. We will discuss that at a future meeting. So we don't want to get into that debate today because we think that will be one that a lot of people will want to be a part of. And we know that this was somewhat of a last minute addition. So with that, I'm so grateful that we were able to have Trisha to join us at the last minute, and grateful that you were all able to attend. Anything, Rebecca, that I missed before we pass it over?
No, that's perfect. I'll just reiterate, because I know we've thought about this quite a lot as a board. Our next meeting will be focused on whether or not the community board is in support of changing the open meetings law. But with that, welcome back, Trisha. We miss you.
Hi, everybody. I am going to keep my fingers crossed that my son doesn't overpower the volume on my phone, on my computer here. So forgive me if you hear anything in the background, but Teddy misses you all too. And it's really nice to see so many community board members. So this is really exciting. I'm the Director of Community Affairs for the Borough President's Office. And in that role, we kind of oversee, my team oversees all things kind of related to community boards and community organizations and things like that throughout the borough. And obviously the topic of open meetings has been a huge one in our office and in our department since really Mark first jumped into this role. As we all know, if you are a current community board member, or even if this is the first time you're on Zoom, the reason why we're able to meet right now through this way is because of an executive order that the governor passed, allowing for kind of suspending the rules for open meetings where you would have to be in person. That has been set until March 16th, which is until tomorrow. After which, if the executive order doesn't get extended, then, kind of the regular rules of open meetings goes back into effect. I'm really excited that you guys are talking about later on some of the legislation that's out there. We'll certainly be listening into that conversation because it's something that we've weighed. But what does this mean exactly? This means that assuming that no kind of extension gets signed by the governor's office, that does mean that kind of boards are expected to go back in person. We know that means different things for different boards. We know that for some people they have some significant health concerns, that we know that others are having some real hard times finding venues, frankly, that are ready and willing to go back in person. Mark did send a letter to your chair, to Marcel and to Will, to disseminate out. And I think that CBA actually received all of it, but just kind of what we know thus far. We've been in constant contact with Corp Counsel on this in order to get some legal advice. And so while I am not a lawyer, as you all know, I'm happy to pass on some of that information tonight. So certainly boards are expected to go back to in-person. Whether or not what we've heard is that boards are not allowed, while boards are not supposed to be asking about vac status or screening for vac status, they are, if they are with a venue that requires vac status or screenings for that sort of thing, or mask wearing or those sorts of requirements as a condition of their renting space, then you're of course able to comply with that. Other sorts of health guidelines are supposed to be followed according to the CDC and other health and the DOH, in order to kind of follow that. And if you are in a situation, I would say that where let's say a normal venue like Ramaz or another venue, says yes, but you have to limit the number of people you have available, then you are allowed to allow the public to participate virtually, although board members still should be in person. So sorry, that's Teddy in the background. That's kind of where we stand right now. I'm sure that Will can tell you that we've been in kind of constant contact with all of our district managers about what's going on here and where they're seeing hiccups in this. People are talking about hybrid. They're talking about the financial barriers that they're facing when boards are facing this, or again, trying their best to fulfill, to meet these expectations. And we know that for every board, it's different. So really, I'm happy to talk about and share with you what some other boards are doing in certain cases. If you are trying to figure out how to manage, I'm happy to talk a little bit about where we'd like to see things land. But really, we understand that this is something that kind of all boards are facing in a different way, and every board, because they are in a different area, have different options available to them. So trying to work with everybody and make sure that they have the support that they need.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful maybe before we turn to questions, Vanessa, if you agree, to maybe kind of say what you've heard from some other community boards. Mm-hmm. And I'll just add that we do have the equipment to, we bought the cameras to be able to make sure we can use Zoom to live stream. And thank you to Mark for extending the contract on Zoom. That's something that the board had spoken about previously. So that's just, we will still be able to do that. And hopefully we can, when we see where things go in terms of open meeting laws, maybe work with you in your office to make sure we can do that continually.
Yeah, so if Trisha, if you're able to talk through some of the other options that you're seeing.
Sorry, I thought you were telling me. Yes, absolutely. Sorry about that. So, okay, so boards, so they really range. You have boards who everybody kind of is aware of what the legal guidelines have been in place. This is coming out in different ways. Some boards are trying to meet outdoors, although it's a real it's a real shot in the dark based on the weather. A lot of boards are finding that that venues like public schools or libraries are kind of the safest bet, although those also provide the worst Wi-Fi service. So in terms of streaming, those are also some of the hardest places to do that. You have boards who are putting some of their committee meetings are going to be in their board offices with publics being able to stream in. You have other situations where boards are just being really strategic about what committee meetings they're going to have in a certain month and thinking about this and kind of just kind of treating March specifically and maybe even April very differently than what you're going to treat every other month, because knowing that you're gonna knowing that by the time May hits, this may be a very different situation. Most venues we're hearing about are still going to require some sort of screening or vaccination, and boards are understanding of that and moving along. I think that in general, people are trying to give as much warning to the public as possible in terms of, and we're particularly sensitive towards ULURP applications or things that are really requiring votes, just to be really careful about making sure that those also or those kind of situations are getting accommodated as appropriately as possible.
Thank you for that. It's good to know what some options are. I think we do have some questions already, if that's okay with you, Trisha.
Absolutely. I want to hear from all of you and see how everybody's winter is gone. I've missed you all.
Lori?
Hi, Trisha. It's so great to see you.
It's good to see you too.
Thank you so much for coming here. Okay, so I have two questions. One is there any sort of thing that we can hang our hat on that's going on in Albany that is going to change this, in the next 24 hours? I mean, that's my first question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
So tell me about
So-
the atmosphere.
So I forgot you asked a perfect question. So the last time this was extended, and it was extended for I think maybe 3 weeks or so. It was extended literally at 12:05 after AM. So it was truly after the deadline had passed. So I wish that I could give you some sort of guarantee here, and really, and I'm sure that Russell and Will can tell you that the best I've been able to do is try to read the tea leaves here. All of the governor's actions, all of the state's actions thus far have been really moving towards reopening. So it feels like, from one non-legal, non-Albany person looking at this, it really feels like it would be counter message if she were to extend this. And that's why, in so many ways, we've kind of, and because it was so late in the game the last time that she did extend this, we've kind of counseled everybody, saying that you really need to be planning to go back in person. Just because nobody, and CB9 is actually the first one that's kind of on the docket. Their full board meeting is on the 17th. So there's just no way for them to be able to plan, on less than 48 hours notice for an in-person meeting. And so we've kind of given everybody for the last several weeks kind of advice of, really, you should be making all plans going forward. The 17th is also my next borough board meeting, and that will be in person. Even though many people would love it to be virtual, but it's going to be in person because we can't kind of plan on that short notice. So, looking at the signs here, I will tell you that I think I called Will, it was probably Wednesday of last week, maybe, or Tuesday of last week. And I said that in my last conversation with Corp Council, they had said that the governor's office had been in contact with them about ramifications of this and what could happen. So they are aware of it, and nothing is written in stone. And that gave me, and I was telling everybody that, like, this is done. This is over, we got to move on. But because of those last conversations last week, people told me that this isn't necessarily a done deal, but, truly, because nobody, especially those who have meetings in the next few weeks, that they have to get done. We're really, advising everybody to act as though this is going to end.
Okay, thank you for saying that, for the clarification. But now, regarding that decision, I understand that everyone wants to, reopen, and the phrase "getting back to normal," which I really hate, is on everybody's mind, that, like, oh, we have to get back to normal. But the fact is that after this, pandemic, and during this pandemic, in my opinion, one of the positive things that have come out of it is that we have done greater use of technology, and that has enabled not only the disabled to attend meetings, but working parents to attend meetings in a way that they never could before, because the childcare issues are so important, and the transportation issues are so important. So I wonder if we should do something, if it would be useful for us to I don't know, do a resolution or do something that would sort of encourage, because, I'm fine with having in-person meetings, but I also think that there should definitely be an option that includes all of these other people, which is, a hybrid plan. And I don't think that that's too, controversial. I mean, I think if we can do both of it, because technology allows us to do it, that's what we should do.
Lori, sorry, I'm just gonna, just for the purposes of this meeting, though, we wanted to steer clear of making any sweeping, resolution, because we didn't give enough notice for this meeting to ensure that we had everybody able to be a part of the conversation. So that's why we're sort of steering away from making, and we know that there's a lot of interest in this debate.
And I just add, and there's kind of multiple bills as well, so we want to make sure we're fully prepared. And in terms of mentioning that for this, as Tricia said, our next full board meeting will be after the deadline. So even if we were going to pass a resolution, it would be too late.
What I'll just say, Lori, is I know that you guys are going to talk about this in multiple meetings, and I think that's great. I think that our office would welcome feedback in general. I'm 100% with you. I think that in general, actually what I would love to find out eventually from Will or from this committee is I would love to know if you guys have been able to measure participation levels during the pandemic versus before the pandemic in terms of people attendance or in terms of, something like that. I think it would be really interesting and really helpful, frankly, to our Albany colleagues who are, really going to be fighting for this. There are so many benefits to, there have been a lot of benefits to online. I can definitely see there's a lot of benefits to being in person, honestly also, but this idea of a hybrid, I think, to not speak on behalf of Will, but what we've heard time and time again is that I think generally what I've heard from boards is that hybrid is the ideal, but it also not only requires legislation, but additional resources to our boards in terms of manpower and in terms of tech and so many other pieces to this. So I think it's definitely worthwhile for you all to think through. And as we talk about budget priorities and as we talk about the future and what makes the most sense in terms of accessibility, which is really the key word in all of this, and opening up the door for as many people to participate in community boards as possible, then, I think it would be great to have kind of thoughtful resolutions. And frankly, I would love for you to come by and visit me downtown, but if you came down to my office, you'd see on my table, I have laid out literally every board's resolution on open meetings and where they stand on the issue. And I don't have one for CB8 yet. So you can certainly, I have them all kind of mapped out, and I've been watching this with kind of a Hawkeye perspective look at this. So truly, I think the more thoughtful you guys are looking at this, not just in terms of what makes sense with accessibility, but what additional resources are needed for community boards in order to make this happen, what spaces make sense, internet, access to reliable Wi-Fi, AV people, whatever else it needs, that all of those things are really helpful. So for future conversations, I know soon, but you're not alone in this, and we're certainly hearing it from all the boards.
Okay, thank you, Tricia.
And if I may add, I think that one of the topic areas that must be in focus for community boards to actually do successful hybrid meetings is all of you guys have been to the spaces that we've used. If you think back, most of them do not have screens, do not have places for cameras, do not have good microphones that could catch the sound of the people who sit in the back. And so think about a space that would be required to have a virtual meeting where you could actually see somebody who's speaking from the public who wants to zoom into the meeting, where all the board members could actually hear them and see them. You're talking about an individualized space that is really designed for community boards or for community board type meetings, and we don't have access to those types of spaces. So you're really talking about advocating for spaces that are dedicated to community board use 4 days a week, because we meet 4 days a week, where that are funded and that are equipped with technology that actually could be used for hybrid. Because if you think back to what we bring to a full board meeting, you think about those big orange cases filled with tablets, you think about the bags that have the timers and everything else like that. If you imagine adding to that a giant projector and a giant screen to then equipped into a space, and if you even think back to what WNET brought to our meetings whenever they would live stream our meetings, it was 3 cameras, a soundboard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are things that community boards that have a budget of $250,000 a year don't have the ability to actually equip. So when we advocate, it should be advocating for spaces that actually could use a hybrid approach too.
All right, can I just mention one thing, Will? That I have been going to For Freedom's political meetings, and they all have always been doing it in a hybrid form. And they always have their meetings at the Trinity Church on 88th Street.
Which is not handicap accessible.
I Oh, well, okay, I'm not gonna argue with you, but I think that they have made things to get there. But I hear what you're saying. But I mean, what I'm saying is that I don't believe that it requires a massive amount of equipment, because
I disagree. I just completely disagree.
well, they've been doing it a lot.
I
All right,
think
okay.
we should hold.
You can disagree with me,
Doug,
but I have the practical knowledge of how these are done, and that
Right.
is not something that an under-resourced community board office has the capacity to really take on.
Right. Well, the political club certainly doesn't have a $250,000 budget. That's what I'm saying. It's like, and they've managed to do it. So I'll get more
All right,
details on it, though.
let's go
I'll
back.
get more details.
and
I
I'll
don't-
just because we don't want to focus.
But are
too
they
much
doing
on-
that 4 nights a week too, by the way?
No, but I mean, I don't know
And
what
4
the
weeks
availability.
out of the month. And,
Right.
think about that too.
Right. I don't know what the availability is of the church, and also, are we talking about all of the committee meetings? Because, that's another thing that I don't know. Like, in other words, if we're going to be able to do the committee meetings virtually, and then we only have to worry about the big board meetings, that would cut down on stuff, Anyway, I'm just saying, like, I think that we need to look at it, with open eyes and not with assumptions from the past. Okay, that's all.
We definitely will. This deserves definitely. I mean, if we could get it all done in one meeting, I would love that. It might just be a long one because people have a lot of feelings, but we'll address it. I'll just add to remind everyone that the only community board meeting that had ever been live streamed before COVID was the full board. That also meant that land use meetings that were not the same night as full board were not live streamed. And we did, in our internal budget, spend some money to get some money that we had to use to buy the OWL cameras, which would enable us to kind of film stuff. But it's still, that's nowhere near what we'll need. So I think, as everyone has said, a very complex issue, and we'll address that side next meeting. Back to Vanessa.
Oh yeah, just I think this conversation is a perfect example of why we're not tackling, putting any type of resolution together today, because I think there's just a lot of different facts to pull together, a lot of different perspectives to consider. I think next with their hand raised was Sharon. No?
We do have two members. We have one member of the public. We should maybe.
Oh,
I can wait. I
sorry
can
about
wait.
that. Boaz, thank you so much for raising your hand again. And I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
No problem. So first of all, I'm willing to bet that you guys don't have the equipment to run efficient hybrid meeting. And when I say hybrid meeting, it means that some people are sitting in the same room with microphone. Because let's say that Boaz is sitting in the church and someone over the phone is hearing the meeting. He needs to hear Boaz. So you need the microphones. It's a lot of equipment, and specifically that if I connect the dots, you don't have a place, like a very specific place that you guys are meeting. It's always the places you guys are changing the places. So I think that for the short term, the best solution is to have most of the meeting, probably virtual meetings, and the important meeting, like the full board, in-person meeting, allowing people to listen just to stream, not to participate through a YouTube or something like that. For the long run, definitely the technical people, Bill and so on, need to figure out, need to figure out how to be ready for the next variant, for COVID version 3.0. But yeah, that's it for my end. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that perspective. Appreciate that. Okay, now we'll go to Sharon. Oh no, sorry. Now we have another member of the public. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Sharon.
No worries.
Your view is beautiful, Sharon.
Faith?
Hi, this is Faith Fraser. I just want to jump in for a second. I'm a poll worker, as lots of you know, and a coordinator in my other time. And during the pandemic, a lot of places made special arrangements to have people come in and use the equipment, the space. But I know just from helping to look for more early voting sites, and I just use this as an example, that now that things are opening up, a lot of those places, and I can speak from a church perspective too, are not going to have those extra times because the churches probably let in the Democratic or Republican clubs because they're closed for all the AA meetings they usually host. So I just throw that in there to think about that. I think as the pandemic ends, there are not going to be as many opportunities and extra places that we can use.
Thanks, Faith, and it's good to hear you. What I'll just say is that, again, we're very aware that boards are struggling with this, and every board is very different. There's a board in our borough that has, frankly, 3 spaces that they are able to meet in. It's just they do not have venues, and 2 of those spaces, are just not ready to allow for in-person meetings. And so, there's what we've asked, and Will has been really great at doing. I've asked them just to continue to send me the responses that you get from venues, like to demonstrate particularly to Corp Council again and our legal folks that there is every effort is being made to follow the guidelines and follow the rules out there. This is in so many ways just new territory for everybody, and I think we're trying to. Our office is always going to be on this, is going to be trying to be supportive to the community boards as much as possible. So really just trying to demonstrate to everybody that everybody's, doing the best they can.
I totally agree. And I agree with you, Will. There's a lot of equipment that's needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Faith. Yep, Sharon, you're up.
Hey, Tricia, we do miss you.
I miss you guys.
Yeah, totally. I have been in support of having or continuing these virtual meetings. However, since that is unlikely, and I totally understand why, I do think that we ought to have a hybrid approach. And Vanessa and Rebecca, I think that the next meeting that the committee has, we ought to make sure that the next time Tricia sits down at her desk, that she can count a CB8 resolution and include a CB8 resolution on her desk along with the other community boards as well. And also, I'd like to emphasize that while it's important to understand the challenges as Will has outlined them, I think it's absolutely critical that we not be too terribly persuaded by them, because our charge is to enable a situation in which the public as well as community board members can engage in a hybrid format. And one person does not have to have all of the answers. So what we should do is to clarify what is important in terms of how we want to host and have our meetings, and then participate with either the borough president's office or elected officials or other groups, other community boards, as a matter of fact, to figure out how we can get this done. But one person or just a few people cannot address all of the issues. Out of the gate, we should not feel some hesitancy with focusing on this hybrid approach because of the challenges that we could possibly face. You know what? We survived COVID. At the end of the day, we survived COVID. We'll continue to survive COVID and do so in a manner that is most helpful, that will keep us safe and well going forward.
Thank you.
I just want to maybe add and say, I really applaud your co-chairs here for splitting this up into two sections. It's frankly the way I've been dealing with it in our office. The longer term push for a hybrid structure, or for the hybrid option, right, is something that I think is wonderful. But I also think that it's not going to happen tomorrow. It certainly won't happen by the 16th. Kind of focusing. So in my mind, at least, and how we've been discussing this internally at our office, is really what happens after tomorrow, and then what happens with Albany legislation down the road. I wish that it could happen instantaneously, but it really won't. And so I kind of think that so many of these wonderful comments about what a hybrid could look like, what's important, what's needed for it to be successful, all of those things are really good. But really, to Vanessa and Rebecca's to their credit, it also may not have it won't have an immediate impact on what happens after tomorrow. So I appreciate all of these comments, and I really look forward to getting more feedback, official feedback.
And I'll also add, I don't know if everyone here remembers that one full board meeting we had during this turbulent time. We had begun planning to having as a technology committee to having that meeting to potentially vote on a resolution in support of open meetings law, but then the state of emergency got extended and it wasn't necessary. And one of the great things about the COVID age is I feel like we're having many more committee meetings, so it didn't quite happen. We'll definitely have it. And I just want to reassure you, Sharon, I think at least Vanessa and my interest in making sure we address all the challenges is not to dissuade us from acting in one way or the other. It's to make sure we know what we need to ask to be able to support our endeavors if we do want to change that thing. And I have to commend the board and the multiple committees. I mean, I had mentioned earlier that we had already begun addressing this in the budget committee as well. And we're so grateful again to Mark's office for extending that Zoom contract, because there was going to be no way we would be able to afford continuing to do what we do without that help.
Yep. Thanks. I see Alita next.
Thank you. Hi, Tricia. Good to see you.
To see you too.
Thanks. So just in terms of hybrid, having in-person meetings really matters for people getting to know each other, for the collegiality, for the sense that someone is not just pro-development, is not just anti-dog runs, is not just pro-bike lanes or anti-public library help, but that they're fuller, richer people, and the ability to chat, walking in, walking out, and walk home together, sit next to someone and ask questions is priceless. But so is the ability for people to join when they are unable to, or don't have the time to make trips across the district a couple of miles, who have young children or are elderly or have health issues, as Lori and others have pointed out. So having a hybrid meeting, I think, is essential. Anecdotally, I see how many people attend meetings, full board meetings, as well as regular committee meetings. I think the public may stay longer at full board meetings because they don't have to worry about going home. I've been to meetings at CB2. I would have gone to CB7 if there weren't a conflict with the CB8 meeting. I think the ability to attend even meetings in other districts and learn from them or bring back information is really valuable. Having more people attend CB8 meetings from other areas. I invited the chair of CB7 who came to our congestion pricing task force yesterday, and the same with the chair of CB11 who came last time. I don't think they would have come if they actually had to get on a bus or a train or walk. And having their information about their own community's perspective was really valuable. So there's something to be considered for the exchange of information. I think collaboration, whether it's among members of the community or among people who live in Manhattan, is really critical. And having a hybrid makes it much easier. Logistically, though, I think there are enormous issues. And I don't know if you said this, if I missed it, I apologize, but maybe Mark could set up some kind of working group with people from different community boards or different governmental entities. I know city planning has had hybrid meetings because I wonder, how do you call on people? I mean, when I was chairing, I knew that there were certain people maybe who were more likely to call the question. In Zoom, you have to go in order. In public, you don't. You can call on people with different points of view because they're not in order, and you could say who is supportive and who opposes it, and then call one by one or two by two. You can ask for a show of hands. If you're going to do that, you need to be able to do it with both people watching and people who are present. I'd also say that people watching have as much right as people in person to express their views and ask their questions. So the logistics of how do you coordinate that seems huge. I don't know if we'll address this. I know he addressed equipment, but in addition to all of the equipment, and because we had bought the equivalent but much heavier versions of iPads, they were huge cases. And he would sit up at the front with me and manage a lot of the procedural aspects. And then there were people who sat outside and managed the return of those iPads or questions or giving out papers that elected officials had left or community boards had left. So at least two people need to be in person. And then you need to have someone manning the Zoom, if you will, and muting and unmuting and transferring information and posting when there's a piece of legislation or something to look at. So there are a lot of logistics that need to be considered, which is why I guess I would suggest a working group so that you can get an idea. It doesn't have to be something that each board adheres to, because boards have different ways of doing things, but it could serve as a template. It could absorb comments and questions and best practices or experiences with Zoom from other boards. Maybe there have been hybrid meetings. So it would prevent each board from having to reinvent the wheel every time they were figuring something out. So I don't know if that's something that's already been discussed in Albany or discussed at Mark's office, your office. But those are just some ideas, because I think logistically managing the way a meeting actually runs with people participating, with guest speakers. How do you deal with a land use presentation, for instance? And I know we did buy a lot of equipment, and I know Channel 13 took a lot of time to set it up and to take it down at the end of every meeting. And then we have also not just, I forget what they're called, executive sessions where the public and the office is closed. It's just board members. So you have to be able to manage that without assistance too. We do it with breakout rooms. Will puts us all in a breakout room, or everyone would be tucked out of the assembly room, the meeting room, so that we were able to meet privately. And so that has to be figured out, how someone could do that, because when we've done it sometimes without Will's being in the room, it's snarled up a little. So there are a lot of logistical issues, and every space has to be accessible. And it was really, really hard. And so I'd also urge someone from your office to help community boards find a space. Now we no longer have the blood center available, or if we did, I wouldn't go personally, but that's another issue. We have other places, but they're not accessible, and there are issues with that. And if you're talking about screens, as Will pointed out, there are issues with that. So maybe having staff at your office help community boards figure it out, because there are so many different points. And I don't mean to be a naysayer. I think that it's important to have hybrid meetings, but it would be a disaster if these questions weren't figured out in the beginning. I remember a Landmarks Preservation Commission meeting in the beginning where I think for 45 minutes they were trying to figure out logistics of how while the meeting was supposed to be going on. And that doesn't really help community boards' reputations, or Mark's office reputation, or Albany's attorney's reputation. So there's all of that. But for me personally, having seen it as, bless you, having seen it as a chair, and Vanessa, and having seen it from not as a chair and Zoom in both directions, I think it's really valuable. It exposes so much more of the public to the community board to have these things be available on Zoom, for instance. And I know how much easier it is for me to attend different kinds of meetings with the city and other places, bless you again, if being available on Zoom. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say, we are certainly, Will can tell you, and if you asked actually any district manager in the last 48 hours, if I've spoken to them, the answer would be yes. We are kind of taking an individualized approach. Why I can pretty much tell you exactly where every community board right now is meeting in the next month, or where if they're not meeting. So we are kind of on a very kind of individual level trying to assist with the community boards. I'll certainly take back kind of the idea of a working group. And that's certainly a good idea. I will just say also that this issue of best practices shared amongst community boards has come up before, and we're actually thinking about it a lot. It's not just for this matter, but for many other issues in general. We've kind of identified that community boards don't actually have a lot of ways to share best practices. And so that's something that I'm very excited about what we're working on, and we'll hopefully be able to enact soon. I know Will and I have had multiple conversations about this, but in general, we're thinking about other new ways using technology that we can support our boards and give them more structure and more ways to share amongst themselves best practices. At this point, I think I've probably gone to every board meeting at least once, but maybe twice, and seen things that I love, and that things that could be improved upon, with everything of how everything from how they post their meetings to how they run their meetings to how they run Zoom to how they deal with resolutions, like truly just things that shine on every single board, and things that could be really improved upon just by sharing better information. So we have that opportunity at Borough Board and Borough Service Cabinet, but hopefully we're going to create in a technological way that boards can share other information as well, and that should be coming out soon.
And just one more thing, maybe there's a way for the borough president's office to help staff the in-public meetings. I was thinking about this. Will works really hard at the public meetings, and the secretaries do as well. To take someone else from the office means either that they get paid overtime or that they're short for 3, 4, 5 hours maybe of office work, which puts a burden on everybody else in the office. On the other hand, you need to have someone with Zoom who knows the board, knows maybe some of the public who are more outspoken, and where to find resolutions, where to find the legislation, because they seem to go up instantaneously. If someone refers to a resolution, it's there. And having someone familiar with how the boards maintain their websites, which, as you probably know, are all different too, and many of which could use improvement, and have good things, as you've said about the meetings. So there's just a lot of ways I think that the borough president's office could support community boards and make it easier for them, because every time there's overtime and someone's not in the office, it's harder for committees to get their work done. It's harder for resolutions to go out. It's harder to have a conversation with someone in the office. So, and then staffing two, because they're almost like 2 meetings at once, a hybrid model. So it's just a suggestion of ways that physically community boards could be supported. So thanks again, Tricia, and good to see you. And hi to Teddy and Tom.
Thanks. Barbara.
Thanks. I think too many people did not follow your lead to say we're not doing something specific. I'm just going to say 2 things. 4 Freedoms pays for their space. The acoustics is not good. I've been a Zoom person, and it's been somewhat frustrating. I do find when it's hybrid, there's a lot of frustration that goes on. So, but I'm not going to give my opinion yet. There are just certain things we have to talk about. Are we talking about the board members versus the public if we're talking about hybrid? Are we talking about streaming? The word streaming was used. Streaming is very different than Zooming. How do you ask questions and so on? What importance is that? How can they ask questions without it being a Zoom, which can be very confusing? What is our duty as we are a governmental arm, when we hear that all of our friends who are governmental workers have to go back, have to be vaccinated? What is our duty to say, we chose to be on the community board, we chose to be there, what should we be? I find it frustrating when people say it's a no-brainer. Of course, we want it. I find my brain goes back and forth with it. I understand we will not have to have as many people tune in because we will be going to the theater and we'll be going out. In beginning days, we had nothing else to do. I loved my Zooms because it was the only interaction I had with people for a very long time. So I'm sure, Tricia, you'll do the fantastic job of getting it done like you've always done. And thank you so much to do it. And I look forward to the next meeting. I have strong points of view, but this is not the time to do it. But we do need places that do not charge money, and some do. So
I will just say, Barbara, thanks. I may botch this, but I'm fairly certain that the last phrase that was used is that community board members are public servants, but they are not public employees. So you are not required to, you are not mandated. You must know this because Will never asked everybody to submit their vaccine status to them. And you were also not fired after that date passed. So you are public servants, you're not public employees. You, in terms of requirements again, I'm sorry, you asked some questions in the beginning and I wanted to respond to them. And now you're muted, Barbara.
Oh.
Am I done? Okay. You need to go to places that don't charge money is one thing. I do care about the Will and staff and how they could possibly do it. But I do think that the things we have to concentrate on are we're talking about community board members, where I feel very strongly about, right, versus the public, streaming versus Zooming.
That's where I wanted to clarify. Thank you. So when we talk about generally and I'm so glad you asked this question, such a good question, because it gets me because people oftentimes misuse, there's a lot of phrases that we use a lot and slightly different definitions that make a huge difference. So there is no, right now when the executive order ends, assuming that it ends tomorrow, there is no mechanism for which board members can participate virtually, meaning go on a Zoom and participate virtually in community board meetings. That is the legal kind of interpretation of that. The law department has looked at this and has told us that, however, if in cases where you cannot find a venue that will accommodate the public plus the board, they are distinguishing between members of the public and board members, and you should prioritize board members being in public, with members of the public being able to participate virtually, meaning give testimony, ask questions via Zoom. You're right, streaming. So our borough board meeting is on the 17th, and board chairs are allowed to participate and are expected to be in person. Members of the public, because we are still maintaining safe distance in our office, we are still going to keep people separate. Members of the public are going to be able to stream that meeting because they are not technically given a voice to ask questions in that venue, but they will also have a overflow room where they can watch the meeting. In that case, when they're streaming, that's something very different. When we talk about hybrid, and again, this is a little bit more for your future meetings, but when we talk about hybrid, we say that that is the ability for all, like Zoom, for everybody to interact, to give testimony, to provide input, to participate in the meeting while being virtual. So, for this board and for all the boards, that's where people are calling, that's the legislation piece, because right now after the 15th, that requirement for board members to be in person at minimum, but everybody to be in person really goes back into effect.
Am I still unmuted?
Yeah.
Okay, and committee meetings versus full board or land use meetings. I think that there may be a distinction. And one of the things that I grapple with is for committee meetings, we had a much easier time getting, you can get a speaker from California to come if it was on Zoom. So I don't know if we'll distinguish those two, or legally you could distinguish those two.
So there is no, I will just say that the Corp Council does not distinguish between committee meetings and board meetings. They've recommended and advised that all meetings should be going back in person. I know that every board is different in this, and I know that, you know, that's just what Corp Council has said. They don't see a distinction between those meetings. Every board is doing this a little differently. The best that we can do is provide the legal guidance that we've received, and we will try to support you guys as much as possible. You know, we're not
It's not a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this for the end, but I'll just add it now, just in terms of Russell, because I know he had mentioned that committee meetings are going to be virtual in the immediate future. That is because legally all action taken by the committee will have to be voted on at the full board, and therefore, which will meet in person. So that kind of saves us in one sense. The other point is just about streaming. Like, one thing we can do now, and we don't need to vote on this or anything, but as like committee co-chairs, Vanessa and I will try our best to work with Will to make sure that meetings that we hold in person, we will attempt to make sure they're live streamed on YouTube. That's really to not so much in terms of public participation during the meeting. That's the reason I've been talking about this so much. That's to ensure that people, you know, who work at night will still be able to see what we talked about. We might not have the best equipment, but we're going to work our hardest and really help our board office to make sure we can try and attempt to do that. Because again, we hadn't done that previously. And this is one thing, even if this board did not want to approve hybrid meetings or virtual meetings in the future, I would really, really love us as a committee to be a leading voice on making sure that, you know, the public has full access to what we discussed. And I think, you know, we'll try and see if the OWL cameras we bought are enough. I think, as Will pointed out, they probably won't be, but we're going to try and make sure we don't lose that aspect for the public. So back to Vanessa.
All right, sorry, I was muted. Thanks so much. Okay, and Sherry, thank you so much for your patience.
Oh, no, Alita already mentioned the elephant in the room, mentioning the blood center. I didn't even think about it, that board members may not want to go there. They may not want us to be there. I mean, we were very strong opponents to their expansion. So you know, human nature, what it is, I wouldn't take it for granted that they're going to extend themselves to accommodate us. So I think that's a special consideration that, you know, our typical meeting place may not be available. And I just thought that should be on the record too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing that. And thank you, everyone. I know we got a little bit into sort of some of the pros and cons, but I think it's given us a lot of information so that we can come prepared when we're ready to really discuss and debate what, if we as a board want to put forward any type of resolution recommending one way or the other. So I appreciate you all bearing with us. As we say, we're not going to do anything right now today. We're just going to focus on the information that Tricia is giving us, but also giving us things to keep in mind as a board, so that when we come to the next conversation, we can be really prepared. So thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
Oh, just Vanessa, it may be helpful for you guys to take a look. The borough board itself passed a resolution on this back in December or October. You may want to reference. I can send you some other examples of what the boards have focused on, just so you guys might be able to see how other boards are talking about this.
That'd be great.
And we'd love you to, we'll definitely reach out when we're planning that next meeting, which will be kind of the next meeting of this committee. I'll just add, we promise we won't be meeting every month as a committee, but we do want to make it more active. And so many of you have raised such interesting points, and we really hope you'd consider joining our committee. because I think we're living in a time in which the technology committee means something completely different than it did maybe 5 years ago. So we really hope you'll consider coming on board. I see Lori saying, yeah, a lot of people. So I will email you all. Hopefully you'll join. Is there any old business anyone wants to raise? Don't see any hands. Any new business anyone wants to raise? And please be mindful of kind of the plan for the next meeting, so we don't need to get too much into our next steps. Before I see if there is a motion to adjourn, I just, both Vanessa and I want to really thank Tricia again for making the time, and we miss you so much, and we're so proud of everything you've been doing.
I miss you guys. I'll see you soon.
Alita?
Motion to adjourn.
All right.
A second.
Great. Yay. Thank you,
Night,
everyone.
everyone.
Have a wonderful
you.
night. Thanks.
Hi, Saida.
Bye, Alita.
Bye.